There's a lot of things about this conversation that touch in on the key things we talk about here at Reach, so I'm excited to share about it.
Set it up. What's happening?
It took him about 30 seconds to start peppering me with questions. Those questions have been there for a long, long time. He didn't think it was possible for him to be forgiven.
What was going on that gave him that barrier?
There were other people that were planting seeds along the way. What's the one takeaway? Well,
this week on the Reach Podcast. All right, I am here today, this week, with my special guest, Dr. John Hopper. John is Executive Director here at Reach. And John, I want to say thank you for being my guest on the podcast today.
It's always great to be with you, Blaine.
I always look forward to it as well. So this week, we're looking at a story. We're talking about a conversation that you've had and with one of your friends, somebody you're just walking with. So set it up. What's happening?
So, I talked to you today about Steve, and that's not his real name, but I'm just going to keep it at Steve today. And so Steve and I haven't known each other very long. It's only been 2 or 3 months. So, but the conversations have gone deep and wide in that time. And I think there's a lot of things about this conversation, I think, that touch in on some of the key things we talk about here at Reach. So I'm excited to share about it. So, first of all, how did I even meet Steve, right? So I met Steve through really like friend of a friend kind of a thing, right? So Steve's a middle-aged guy, and it's actually his parents reached out to me, through another friend, so because they had heard that I'm someone who's willing to entertain people's questions and have conversations with them. So, and I think one of the things that's sort of valuable about that is that when we begin to enter into relationships with people and have conversations with them and love on people and hear their stories, we actually get a reputation.
So, what a concept.
So we get a reputation like that's somebody that we could point people to. So so I would say even my earlier years of sharing Christ, people weren't coming to me, right? It's always me going to them, right? So, and that's still a lot of the case, but there's more of people kind of finding me because of that reputation. So, and that's not anything great about me. It's just an encouragement to all of our listeners that as you begin to reach out to people and love and listen to people, oftentimes people sort of show up on your doorstep. And that's exactly what happened with Steve. So
you get connected to him, and this particular conversation we're going to unpack, where does that occur? Yeah,
so it actually occurred, I do have a little office space in Houston, and so he came to my office. And
the Reach World Headquarters?
That's right, something like that. So, and I mean, it took him about 30 seconds to start peppering me with questions.
Really?
So, we talk a lot about at Reach the intellectual barrier, right? So when people have sort of reasonable questions about God and Christianity and the Bible, I would say things like, well, yeah, if I was in your position, I'd want to know why I should trust the Bible too. I mean, there's a lot of religious books out there. So in that way, sort of responding to those questions rather than being like, you idiot, you should believe the Bible, or something like that, right?
Was that one of his questions?
Yeah, so that was one of his questions.
What were some of the others that he's throwing at you?
So he's asking me, say, questions about God and suffering, for example.
Okay.
He's asking me questions about, well, what about people who haven't heard about Jesus? He's asking me questions about even, can we be sure about, God existence, those kinds of things. Although he was pretty settled on that one, actually. So, but it was one of those kind of situations where you answer one question and it's like, well, I got another one, and off we went. And so we've gotten together several times now, and each time there's been kind of new questions that he's had. And one of the things that I'm really careful to do, Blaine, in those conversations is to say, ask me more questions. Like, what do you got? So, because I think a lot of people, when it comes to these questions about God and Christianity or the Bible, they've had them for a long time. And they're not sure the environment that they can actually share them, or whether are you going to get offended if I ask these questions, right? So when you just sort of invite it, like, oh man, these are great questions, like keep asking me, then people will ask their questions. And so many times those questions have been there for a long, long time. So, I mean, I was meeting with another guy just last week, and he's probably 30 to 35, and he said, I started having these questions in middle school, and nobody could answer them. So I just figured that, there's no real substance to God or Christianity. So these questions have been there a long time, right? And so we need to help draw those out, because we can't get people past the barriers that they have until we know what they are, right? So if we're open arms in terms of the questions that people have, then we're able to give them some answers that can be real helpful to them.
Yeah, and so as you're fielding all these questions, by the way, it sounds like every difficult question known to me all at once. I don't know how long the time period was. But he's throwing all these hard questions at you. You're trying to help unpack them as quick as you can. But do you land on one, or do you find a thing that's like a real sticking point for him?
So, one of the things that came up, and this actually sort of moves then over to the emotional barrier, is that after I began to answer these questions and deal with them with kindness, you could see his trust level with me kind of go up. So he began to share with me then his concern that, well, I think God's been with me through these hard times that I've had, but I've never felt Jesus is with me. So, and he had this big delineation between God being with him, but Jesus not. So, so we had to talk through that, but it was clearly connected more with sort of this emotional barrier. Like I felt when I was going through these hard things that I never had Jesus by my side, right? So, so we began to talk about well, who is Jesus, right? So, I mean, he's saying that God's there, but Jesus isn't, right? And maybe it's been Jesus that's there all along.
Sure.
And he's just not recognizing Jesus to be God, right? So we talked some about the claims of God, and we even jumped into Daniel chapter 7, where we see the Son of Man described there, and how clearly the one in Daniel 7 is being worshipped as God, and it's Jesus, right? So so we talked through that, but again, I think at that point we were starting to deal with an emotional barrier that he had. So
without giving too much away, what was going on that gave him that barrier?
He's had some real mental struggles in the last many years, and I don't know if those were brought on sort of by physical chemistry, or whether they were brought on because he opened the door to some spiritual things that weren't great for him. I haven't been able to sort of unravel that all, and I'm not sure anybody's been able to unravel it all. But he was just concerned that if there's really a Jesus, why am I not feeling him present here? Right?
Sure.
So we got past the intellectual, so we started to dive into that, that emotional, and as I began to give him some things that gave him some assurance that I think Jesus, he really was there, and has been there. Then I think it became sort of clear that there was a spiritual barrier involved as well. So Steve, he as we went on in the conversation, he began being more comfortable with me, and this was really a series of conversations that we had. He began to sort of lay out ways in his life that weren't very good, right? So he recognized that if there's a God out there, he's fallen way short, right? So, in fact, he has felt so much that he's fallen short that he didn't think it was possible for him to be forgiven.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So, so you, again, kind of starting to see the sort of the spiritual sort of barrier that's there for him. And so, I took him to one of my favorite parts of Scripture, and it's not a part that many people are familiar with, but I think it's super powerful, and it happened to be extraordinarily powerful for Steve. So I'm going to share it with you a little bit, if you let me.
Hey everybody, I wanted to take a moment and let you know that the Reach podcast is brought to you by Search, a ministry dedicated to sharing Jesus through friendships and conversations for nearly 50 years. Learn more or get involved at searchnational.org. Before you share the passage, though,
Yep.
How often do you do that? Like where you're talking with somebody and then you open the Bible and go to a passage. Is that regular? Is it, you just feel it out? How do you know?
So it is a little bit of a feeling out, right? So, I mean, we talk about evangelism being a process. You kind of have to see what people will give you, right, in a certain situation. So I don't carry my Bible in my back pocket. You know, I guess we sort of do on our phones, but but no, it's not what I pull out right away. Unless somebody asks me particularly a question about something in the Bible, I say, well, let's look at it, right? So, but at this point, we were probably 5 or 6 conversations in, and I felt like he had come to a place of trusting in me, and was sort of willing to give me airtime, you might say, in terms of pulling something out of the scriptures. Yeah.
So did you ask permission, or did you say, hey, I'd like to show you something?
You know, I don't really remember that, but I usually would, couch my words by saying, hey, would you mind if I shared something with you out of the Bible that I think that might be helpful for you? Given where you're at right now. So I usually take that kind of approach, but I do think that approach is good because we're essentially asking permission, right? So then people don't feel like they're put upon, right? Because they've actually said yes to you. Yeah.
No, I think that's great because so often we might want to just go, share stuff with people or go right to the Bible, but the context here, this is 5 or 6 conversations in. You kind of soft sold it a little. You asked permission, and it's gonna, I guess, hit a little different for him, or he's a little more open to hearing. So that's great. Okay, so where'd you go? What's the passage?
So I went to Zechariah 3, actually.
Zechariah 3. Where's that even at, John? Where do I find it?
Sort of towards the end of the Old Testament, and it takes a little bit of context to sort of understand what's going on here. So I gave Steve some context. So the passage is talking about a guy named Joshua the high priest. And so in this time period, there was a high priest named Joshua. There was another fellow, a governor named Zerubbabel. And they were supposed to be rebuilding the temple that had been destroyed by King Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians. And they got started on it, but then they put the work aside for like 15 years. So you're a high priest and you don't have a temple, right?
Nowhere to go.
That's right. And it's not because there are particularly good reasons why they stopped building it. They just did. They got discouraged. Some people tried to discourage them. They quit building it, and they just kind of started building their own houses, and that was it, right? Yeah. So we see this scene here in Zechariah 3. And Zechariah's getting these visions, and he's getting a vision by sort of an angel, and it says, then he, that's the angel, showed me Joshua, the high priest, standing before the angel of the Lord. So Zechariah's getting this vision, and in this vision there's Joshua, this high priest. And he's standing before the angel of the Lord, and Satan's standing at his right side to accuse him. Now, if you think about it, there's probably a lot of things that Satan had to accuse Joshua of. Like, he didn't have to make anything up. He didn't have to lie. I mean, Satan could lie and be deceitful, but he probably didn't have to. He could just say, who do you think you are, Joshua? Like, you can't even build a temple. Like, God gave you this command. You can't. Like, just go away, man, right? Like, just probably, making him feel like schmuck, right? Yeah. So that's what he's doing here.
That's true for all of us.
That's true for all of us. That's right. Like we've got a rap sheet. Like Satan doesn't have to make up anything about us, right? I mean, he can just use the stuff that's real and accuse us, right? So and sort of put us in our place and say we can't be forgiven. I'm X'd out for good.
Yeah, you're too far gone.
They're too far gone, and that's the place that my friend Steve was in. Like, I'm too far gone. I've done these things. I can't be sort of rescued from this. So. But then, verse 2 says, the Lord said to Satan, the Lord rebuke you, Satan. The Lord who has chosen Jerusalem rebuke you. Is not this man a burning stick snatched from the fire. So here's Satan accusing him, but the Lord is saying, no. I've rescued this man. He's a stick I'm taking out of this fire here. And then it goes on, right? And it says, verse 3, now Joshua was dressed in filthy clothes as he stood before the angel. The angel said to those who were standing before him, take off his filthy clothes. And then he said to Joshua, see, I've taken away your sin, and I will put fine garments on you. And so here's this one, right, just sort of full of accusations, right, and meaningful, real things that he had done that weren't good. And God comes along and defends him and plucks him out of the fire, right? And as I'm sharing this with Steve, a couple of our meetings ago, tears just start rolling down his face.
Yeah.
And he looked at me and he said, I am the stick that have been snatched out of the fire. In fact, he actually put that as a question. He's like, so am I the stick that's been snatched out of the fire? Like he wanted to know that it applied to him.
Wow.
So, and I affirmed that, and I, and went on to, pointing to these verses. We say verses 3 and 4, like when we look to Christ, what he does is he takes off that filthy sort of past and history and nature and all those kinds of things, and he dresses us anew. He makes us clean. And since that time that I had with Steve, it's just been a whole different story with him. So I mean, he's still, you can tell he's a bit shell-shocked by his past and things, and he's like, am I going to sort of fall back into things where I was before, and in my mental issues and those kinds of things? But I think he's quite convinced now that the Lord has indeed forgiven him. In fact, when we left that conversation that day, we just left in a big embrace with one another, and it's been neat since then. I've been teaching this group on a weekly basis, and he's started to come to that group now, and to see him sort of resting in his found understanding that the Lord has snatched him from the fire.
It's just such a great story, because so many of the things that we talk about here are played out in it. And I love that you were able to get him to engage with God's word, because there is something powerful about this, especially some of these passages like this one, which are just so striking. It's just, it's one of those that one really stands out in the whole of the Old Testament as a picture of what was to come with Jesus. But the power of him going through that with you, and for you to be able to earn that trust to get there, that's a real different deal than if the very first time you got together and the first thing he says, hey man, here's what you need to know, open it up,
that's right.
Read that, probably wouldn't have had the same effect, I'm guessing.
Yeah,
so
that's right. In fact, there's one other thing I want to make about this is, so I found out that for years, Steve has actually met from time to time with another Christian friend of mine.
Really?
For years. And when I found that out, I got a hold of that friend and said, hey, I just want to let you know what's going on in his life. And he's like, what? So, we talk about evangelism as a process, right? So in a way, I got to be on the end of it, right? So, and there were other people that were planting seeds along the way. And I recognize that. And I think that's important for our listeners to hear. It's not like, you're just in a handful of conversations that, someone's going to turn to the Lord in a dramatic fashion like Steve did. It really was years of people putting, thoughts and loving on him and being concerned about him. And in some ways, I did just get to come in at the end. So.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. So speaking of the end, we're about at the end of this podcast, so I want to wrap it up. What's the one takeaway that you want everybody to have from this interaction?
What's the one takeaway? Well, probably I'd say the one takeaway is that, it's going back to answering the questions that he came in with right away. If I hadn't been able to sort of addressed some of those questions, I don't think we would have gone to the next step. So it doesn't mean that was really the issue. I don't think it was. There were these emotional and spiritual issues which were bigger than the intellectual issues, but it was important that I listened respectfully and affirmed those questions up front. And I think that's a real key to moving conversations along. It's just affirming where someone is at the beginning of our meeting them or beginning a conversation.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Thank you, John. This has been a great episode.
Yeah, well, thank you, Blaine.
Thanks for coming on. We'll have you back again at some point, all right?
Okay, all right.
All right, see ya. Thanks for listening to the Reach Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. That'd be a good idea. Share it with a friend and leave us a review to help others find the podcast. Now, for more resources, please visit reachothers.org and follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and we'd love to hear from you.